welcome you all to today's webinar. As you all know that we have planned a webinar under our IAPMR in association with APMRO and SB NITAR. This is our small step towards strengthen our teaching program, undergraduate teaching program, because most of the colleges are, because of Corona pandemic, the training program is greatly hampered. So this is a small step towards strengthen our competency of our students, our young physiatrists. At the outset, I must thank our President, Dr. Arasu, and our Secretary, Dr. Sanjay Pandey, and our Academic Chairman, Dr. Joy Singh, for their constant encouragement and their support for conducting this webinar. And they have also given consent for providing this IAPMR Zoom platform for conducting this webinar. Thank you, sir, for your support. And I must thank our web administrator, Dr. Harsanand, and also Dr. Amit Ranjan for their technical support for conducting this webinar. So today, in this webinar, we have with us our President of our State Chapter, Association of Physical Medicine Rehabilitation of Odisha, Dr. Sanjay Das. He was our Director of SB NITAR, and also he was the Professor of PMR at AIIMS Bhubaneswar. Sir, I welcome you to this webinar, and I request you to chair this session. And today we have with us speaker of this session or webinar is Professor Mrunal Joshi. So at the beginning, I will request our President to say a few words before starting of the talk.
All the participants, and especially welcome Dr. Mrunal Joshi to take the one step ahead in the learning process. As Dr. Pavitra Sahu has told, that learning has no limit. So we have made a program, the weekly seminar or weekly workshop and discussion on academic topics, mostly common topics we have choice. Those who are day-to-day orthopedic practice or day-to-day PMR practice we are getting. So today's topic is impingement syndrome, and is very common. It's the third most common cause of shoulder pain. Out of all the whole body, third most common cause of shoulder pain is the impingement syndrome. So that is a very interesting topic. We all will take participation in that, and will refresh our knowledge, and we have the exchange of knowledge. I request Pavitra Sahu to start the program. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your encouraging word. Now, I would like to introduce today's speaker, Professor Mrunal Joshi. He is the Director of Rehabilitation Research Center, SMS Medical College, Jaipur, as well as also he is the Senior Professor and Unit Head of Department of PMR, SMS Medical College, Jaipur. And he is also Nodal Officer to Disability Board, SMS Hospital, Jaipur. And currently, he is the Chief Editor of our journal, IJPMR. Also, he is the editor of PMR Buzz. You must be knowing that from his individual aspect and effort, he is presenting some of the important topics in the form of a PMR Buzz. And he is the member of the governing board, Disha Foundation for Special Children, and he is the Dean of Allied Health, Rajasthan University of Health Science, and he is the member of Academic Council, Rajasthan University of Health Science. He is a great academician. I have seen him, his presentation as well as his discussions from my beginning of my career. Sir, I must thank you very much for giving your consent for presenting this topic, and I welcome you, sir, for this webinar. Please.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Sahu, for that humbling introduction. And it is just a journey, and I don't feel that we are anyway senior or junior. We all are colleagues, and today is a very auspicious day. Today is Guru Purnima, so it's a wonderful day to take a class. And as I said earlier, this will be a didactic presentation, which is more focused on a postgraduate class kind of a thing. So I'll share my screen and So can you see it clearly now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So today we'll talk about shoulder impingement. As Dr. Sanjay Das told you, that it is one of the most common presentation that you see in your practice, and that is shoulder pain. Before we go to the main presentation, I'll just recapitulate some of the anatomy. And here we see this is shoulder, and then this is subcutaneous, the acromial bursa. And here you can see this is the subacromial, this is subdeltoid bursa, and the coracoacromial ligament. And then here we have rotator cuff, the supraspinatus, the subscapularis, infraspinatus, and teres minor. All right, okay. So here I have put some colors here to show the rotator cuff. And this is our acromioclavicular joint. And here again, you can see the biceps tendon. Now, the interesting part is if you see biceps tendon, it is actually in front of the humerus in the bicipital groove. And it not only helps for the flexion, but it also pushes the head of the shoulder to keep the head inside and doesn't allow it to pop out. So as Dr. Das said, shoulder pain is third most common MSK disorder. And 48% of people who present with shoulder pain have shoulder impingement. And it was Dr. Charles Neer who first described it. And the patients are generally 40 years. Most of them are more than 60 years. And these are people who are bearing heavy loads and have infection, or are doing smoking, or sometimes they end up taking a lot of fluoroquinolones, and the athletes who participate in overhead activities. The shoulder impingement syndrome is not a diagnosis, but actually it's a clinical entity. It causes mechanical compression of supraspinatus on long head of biceps and subacromial bursa. And this compression usually happens in the subacromial space. And the pain is there in anterior and lateral part of the acromion, which worsens at night. And there is also pain when a person is lying on affected side. And it sometimes radiates to the radial aspect of the mid-arm. When we say it's an impingement, then we say the soft tissue gets entrapped in the shoulder joint. And there is pain in elevation of arm or lying on the affected arm. Usually, there is no preceding trauma, may have a trivial injury, and it sometimes leads to partial or full thickness tear. And subacromial impingement with rotator cuff tendinitis is one of the most common presentation in later stages of shoulder impingement. And our goal as a physician is to restore pain and have a free, powerful movements of the shoulder. Now, if we look here, that during elevation, the force couple develops between deltoid and the rotator cuff muscles. Now, what is happening, if you see the video, the deltoid actually contracts and pulls the humerus head upwards and begins the elevation. Now, if you do not have shoulder depressors like the teres minor and the supraspinatus and the subscapularis, then what will happen? That the head will migrate upwards, and then humerus abuts under the acromion. And beyond 90 degrees, the elevation becomes difficult, because the space between the greater tuberosity and undersurface of the acromion is very small. It's only 6 to 7 mm. And the thickness of rotator cuff is 5 to 6 mm. So, and whole of the cuff goes, the supraspinatus cuff goes upstairs into this space, which is 6 to 7 mm. And so there is very little clearance between the cuff and the acromion. Now, Charles Neer gave 3 stages of shoulder impingement syndrome. The first stage, it is seen in younger people who are younger than 25 years, those who are involved in repeated overhead activities, like they are either playing badminton, volleyball, basketball, or sometimes household young females who are doing like cleaning activities and things like that. And there is tenderness and edema at supraspinatus tendon and acromion. The painful arc sign is there. Radiographs are usually normal. And this stage is reversible with rest and activity modification. Second stage is when we have patients between 25 to 40 years which has similar findings as stage 1, but they are more intense. The passive range is restricted due to fibrosis. Radiographs may show degenerative changes, and pain worsens at night when lying on affected side, and this stage requires long-term rehabilitation. Third stage is patients older than 40 years, mostly more than 60 years. The clinical findings remain the same as in stage 2. Sometimes we see tear in rotator cuff. The passive range of shoulder is limited. We can also see muscle atrophy of supraspinatus and infraspinatus. Radiograph may show multidirectional instability, and surgical intervention is required if conservative management fails. Now, when we talk of impingement, the impingement can, again, as I said, impingement is a clinical entity. Now, what is the cause of this clinical entity? The causes can be divided in two parts, extrinsic and intrinsic. The extrinsic is the extrinsic anatomical part, which is compressing the rotator cuff. So that external anatomic impingement can be a change in acromial morphology. It can be glenohumeral instability. It can be acromioclavicular joint morphology. It can be coracoacromial ligament morphology. It can be os acromial, or it can be a malunited fracture of greater tuberosity, or a big osteophyte post fracture, which can cause external, because these are external factors, are the extrinsic factors for shoulder impingement. Now, coming on to acromion morphology, Bigliani and Morris classified into 3 types of acromion: the type 1, type 2, and type 3. Type 1 is flat, type 2 is curved acromion, and type 3 is hooked acromion. Now, there was an interesting study which said in most of the people who have type 3 acromion or the hooked acromion, they have more than 70% of chances to have rotator cuff tears. But there was another study which said that in ages beyond 60 years, the type of acromion doesn't really matter in shoulder impingement. Then the acromioclavicular joint morphology. The acromioclavicular joint is divided in 3 types. This is this flat joint, and then we have oblique joint, and then we have a curved joint. The most common joint which is involved with impingement is a oblique ACJ joint. The other thing that we come to is the coracoacromial ligament. Now here, if you see this ligament, the coracoacromial ligament is like a window under which the rotator cuff and the subacromial bursa and the bicipital or the biceps ligament actually move. So when you do flexion, all of that moves under the coracoacromial ligament. So if there is tightness of coracoacromial ligament, if there is fibrosis of coracoacromial ligament, or if there is edema in the subacromial region, the biceps and the rotator cuff tendons will brush with coracoacromial ligament, or over a period of time, there will be changes happening in the tendon as well as in the coracoacromial ligament, leading to the shoulder impingement. The other thing that we have is a shoulder impingement, the intrinsic factors. Intrinsic means everything which is because of the rotator cuff. So it can be an altered biology, or it can be genetic component, or it can be a SLAP lesion, or a deep surface rotator cuff tear, or a functional overload leading to overuse strain or a partial thickness tear, or it can be an intrinsic tendinopathy. It's a degenerative process because of aging, poor vascularity secondary to smoking, or secondary anatomic impingement. Now, when we evaluate these patients, we need to have clinical history, examination, then we do spatial clinical test, X-rays, ultrasound, diagnostic infiltrations, and magnetic resonance imaging, and computed tomography. Now, during this presentation, I will not cover these 3 things because then the presentation would have become a couple of hours long. So maybe when we get next time, we can discuss about the shoulder MRI anatomy, or the ultrasound and the dynamic ultrasound of shoulder. But today we'll talk about the therapeutic thing, everything. So looking at the history, there is pain on lifting arm and lying on the affected side, and nighttime pain. we must utilize the mnemonic that we have read in our undergraduates, that is Socrates. So whenever we have pain, we use Socrates: site, onset, character, radiation, associations, time course, exacerbating and relieving factors of that pain, and the severity of pain. We have to ask about the prior injuries, and we also have to ask about the overhead activity or repetitive activity. We have seen some mothers who have slapped their kid, and because of the slapping, they tore their supraspinatus tendon. So we have to ask that, have they hit or have they thrown something? So all that history is important. The next come to examination is inspection. So we have to look for bumps, lumps, rubor, atrophy. For palpation, we have to confirm our inspection finding, the dolor or the heat or the sensations. Then we have to check the active range of motion, the passive range of motion. We have to perform spatial tests, and we have to look for scapular dyskinesis. It is very important because most of the times we miss it. And then we also have to do strength tests because it is very common to see weakness in adduction and external rotation in shoulder impingement. Now, coming on to spatial test, one of the common tests that we do is the empty cam test. So we extend elbow, arm is at 90 degree abduction, 30 degree forward flexion, and internal rotation. And we press it hard, and we tell the patient to resist while we are pressing downwards. If there is severe pain and patient is just unable to hold, then it is called as drop sign. And if there is pain and patient is not able to hold, able to give resistance, but not too much, then the test is positive. And this test for superior portion of supraspinatus. Now, if we change our arm from empty can to full can, and then we do the test, then it tests the anterior portion of the supraspinatus. It is also called as full can test. The specificity for pain and weakness is 50%, and sensitivity for pain and weakness is 89%. The other common test that we do is Hawkins-Kennedy test. We keep arm flexed at 90 degrees, elbows bent at 90 degrees, and we do a forced passive internal rotation. And this elicits pain. And the specificity for impingement is 73%. Sensitivity is 65%. The third test that we do is Neer's impingement test. We immobilize scapula, so we keep one of our hand at the scapula, and then the patient takes the arm in front and then does the internal rotation, and we do passive full flexion. As we do passive full flexion, and if it elicits pain, then we say it's a Neer impingement test. Sometimes we also say anterior impingement test is positive. The specificity for impingement is 73%, and sensitivity is 65%. Then the next one is painful arc syndrome. The painful arc syndrome is when we do shoulder abduction. The pain occurs in abduction between 60 and 120 degrees. So there is an arc where the pain occurs. That is why it is called as a painful arc sign. We can also have painful arc sign in acromioclavicular joint arthropathies, but that painful arc is from 140 to 180 degree of abduction. That is the difference. So this is the painful arc which usually occurs between 60 to 120, and it is positive in supraspinatus tendinopathies. The sensitivity of this test is 53, specificity is 76%. So now if you see all these different tests that we have talked about, the specificity is never more than 90%. So basically there is no single test which is going to tell us about the shoulder impingement. So we have to do all the tests and see how it goes. And based on that, we make a clinical diagnosis. No single test can diagnose a shoulder impingement. The other test that we usually perform is apprehension, the anterior apprehension test. This gives us a clue about the instability of the shoulder. So we keep the shoulder in 90 degrees and elbow in 90 degrees, and then we slowly externally rotate the shoulder. And it is positive if the patient becomes apprehensive or it elicits pain during this movement. And it does not necessarily indicates dislocation, but it is apprehension of the patient while doing this action. The sensitivity is 66% and specificity is 95%. Then one of the other tests that we do for instability is sulcus sign, which we commonly see in hemiparesis or hemiplegias. The scapula is stabilized and we apply inferior distraction force, and the excessive inferior humeral translation is visible with sulcus deformity. So there are many tests that we can do for shoulder instability, but while we are evaluating for shoulder impingement syndrome, I usually perform these couple tests to check the instability. Again, the sulcus sign has a sensitivity of 17%, specificity of 93%. The other important thing that we have to look in is scapulothoracic dyskinesis. It is very important, particularly when you're looking at athletes. Because of the repetitive activity that they get involved into, say maybe a volleyball player, or maybe while he is particularly a person who stands near the net and does only smashes. So there will be few muscles which will be highly built, highly strong because of the repetitive use of the arm while doing his overhead smashing, but the other muscles are not that strong. So these repetitive activity and the sports activity can cause actually scapulothoracic dyskinesis, and we have to be actively looking for it. And this occurs due to the muscular imbalance in conjunction with any pathology or glenohumeral or AC joint. So that can also be there. And we have to observe the scapular movement while lowering the internally rotated arm from elevated position, as this particular movement places stress on eccentric muscles of the scapula. Again, I'm going to show you some attachments around the scapula just to recapitulate and give you a picture. Now, if you look at here, these are the red is origin and blue is insertion. So we have here subscapularis, then we have serratus anterior muscle. And on the right side, you can see the levator scapulae attachment, the rhomboid attachment, then rhomboids major, and then latissimus dorsi, teres major, teres minor, and a small portion of triceps is also getting attached, the long head. Then we have supraspinatus above the spine, infraspinatus, and on the spine of the scapula, we can see a U-shaped attachment of the trapezius muscle. So keep this diagram in your mind, and then we go to the scapular dyskinesis classification. So there is a Kibler's type of scapular dyskinesis, and there are three types: type 1, type 2, and type. So when I say type 1, you have a prominent inferior angle. So the moment you have a prominent inferior angle, it can either be overactivity of the levator scapulae and the upper trapezius, or you can have underactivity of rhomboids and levator scapulae and the teres. So that is how we have to make out what is happening. And similarly, type 2 is when we have a prominent medial margin and posterior tilting of the scapula. Type 3 is when we have a prominent superior angle. Okay. Because based on these scapular dyskinesis, we have to make our mind that what are the muscles which are actually overactive and which are underactive. So we have to strengthen the underactive muscles to achieve the scapular balance. Now, coming into X-ray, the first thing that we should do is X-rays. And unfortunately, most of these times what we see that during our first consultation, we directly go for an MRI, which I feel is not fair until and unless you have a strong indication to do it. It's a costly investigation, and I believe that investigation should be done if that particular investigation is going to change your line of management. If it doesn't change of line of management, then it is only of your academic interest or whatever. So the first investigation usually that we should do will be the X-rays. So again, X-rays are required, but the clinical examination sensitivity is pretty high if you do it correctly. X-rays, if required, should be obtained bilaterally, because sometimes if there are subtle changes in anatomy, we cannot actually make up that there is a pathology or not. The standard views that we, or particularly I do, is AP view or a Y view, and advanced imaging is usually recommended after 6 weeks of treatment. If there is no improvement that is happening, then we can get an MRI done. Static and dynamic USG, if it is easily accessible, and many of our departments have diagnostic ultrasound, and you can do it on the day one also. Again, when you actually write these ultrasound to your private patients, the ultrasounds, the shoulder ultrasound will probably cost you anything between 3,000 rupees, and the MRI would probably cost you 3,500 rupees. And there is a dilemma that then you do an ultrasound and then you order another MRI. So think about it before you write prescription. Now, I have deliberately taken some time while talking about the X-rays, because unfortunately, when you order X-rays, neither of us knows how to take an X-ray, and that is a problem. And I can tell you, if you order a Y view, 99% of the times the radiographer will not do it properly. So we have to know how to take an X-ray so that we can tell our friend who is doing the X-ray that, please, my dear friend, put the patient in such a position and then take an X-ray. So the first thing that we do, AP, when you say AP, it is not actually AP, it's true AP. True AP is anteroposterior 15-degree erect X-ray. So patient stands with affected shoulder against the receptor or the X-ray plate, and the shoulder is 15-degree externally rotated. Arm is supinated and slightly abducted away from the body. And if you draw a line between the medial and the lateral epicondyle, it should be parallel with the image receptors. And then what you get is a true AP view. Now, this is what we are going to get. And here you can see we have sternoclavicular joint, and then we have superior border of the scapula, the superior border of clavicle, and the acromion process of the scapula. This is the subacromial space, the insertion of supraspinatus, the greater tuberosity or infraspinatus attachment, the bicipital groove, the lesser tubercle for subscapularis attachment. This is the articular surface of humerus, the articular surface of glenoid, and this little bump that we see here is the tip of the coracoid process, and this is the inferior angle of the scapula. So this is the normal anatomy that we are going to see. Now, in that X-ray, there are three things that are important for us. The first one is critical shoulder angle. I have measured these angle on a volumetric CT so that you can understand it well. So the critical angle is measured in a true AP view. It incorporates both inclination of glenoid and the extent of coverage by the acromion. So when I say the inclination of glenoid, means that the glenoid cup is this, or what kind of inclination is that? So if there is a risk of rotator cuff lesion, if this angle, and you can clearly see in the diagram how to measure the angle, that if this angle is more than 35 degrees, and risk of arthritis is greater if it is less than 35 degrees. So this is the critical shoulder angle. The other thing that we need to measure is the acromio-humeral distance. Again, it is measured in AP view. And here also you can see this is the distance, the lower edge of the acromion and the humeral head. It is 7 to 14 mm in men and 7 to 12 mm in women. And the abnormally low distance indicates defect in more than one rotator cuff. Why? Because as I showed you one of the videos, and you could see that arm is going in abduction. So what actually happens when you do not have the rotators controlling the humerus migrates upwards. Sometimes if you see MRIs, you can see that the shoulder is not actually fitting in the glenoid, but it has migrated upwards into the subacromial space. So, so this distance is important, and you should watch for the migration of the head of the humerus. The other thing that we see is the acromiohumeral index. The acromiohumeral index characterizes the lateral extension of the acromion. So when we talked about the acromion morphology, we said there are 3 types of acromion: flat, curves, and hook. And so we have to find out how much it is extending. The higher it extends, higher are the chances to get a rotator cuff pathology. So the acromiohumeral distance is the distance GA divided by GH, glenoid humerus and glenoid to acromion. And this is the higher the ratio, the higher chances are there for rotator cuff, as I said. The other interesting X-ray that I want you to know is anterior-posterior 15-degree erect. Now, see the photo that I have shown you. The patient stands with lateral aspect of the injured arm against the image receptors. Keep axilla in center of the receptors. Then the line joining the medial and the lateral border of the scapula should be at the right angles with the X-ray plate. Okay, and this is the view that we see. Now this space shows me if there is any calcified tendon. So I can see that white spot. So that will give me a picture of calcified tendon. So this is the superior angle of the scapula, the spine of the scapula, acromion process, head of the humerus, and coracoid process. This is the scapula, and this is shaft of humerus. Now the third X-ray I want you to know is anterior-posterior 25-degree down outlet projection. Now anterior-posterior, so when I say anterior-posterior means the X-rays are going from collimator to the X-ray film anterior to posterior. Okay, when I say PA, posterior to anterior. When I say 25-degree down, that means they are not straight right angle. They are 25-degree down. Okay, if you have seen the X-ray machine, it has something like a bubble goniometer attached with the collimator. So as you turn the head of the collimator, there is a water level which shows you the angle. So if you want to do a 25-degree down view, then you just turn it and you can see the angle, it changes. Okay, if you have done swimmer's view in your spinal injury patients, nobody knows what is a swimmer view. So you have to learn it, and then you have to teach others also that this is how you do it, swimmer's view. Similarly, here also we have to teach them sometimes. So patient stands there with the affected shoulder towards the receptor. There is a rotation of 15 degrees so that the scapula is parallel. Scapula is not like this. Okay, scapula is like this. So we have to keep scapula in such a way that it is parallel to the image receptors. Arm is supinated, palm facing forward. The line joining medial and lateral epicondyle is parallel with the image receptor. And here we can see the subacromial space so beautifully. You see the X-ray, and here we can see there is a small calcified dot in this space. And this gives us a wonderful view of the subacromion. The last X-ray that I want is also called as Y view. It's a Y projection because the scapula is like a Y. Okay, so this is a Y position with small caudal angulation. Caudal, cranial, caudal. So lateral aspect of arm is in contact with the receptor. The affected arm is in extension and dorsum of the hand on back of the wrist. So like this, while you're scratching your back. And head of the humerus is in center of the receptor. And 15-degree down means the X-ray is not straight. It is coming from 15-degree upwards down towards the head of the humerus. The patient is rotated forward with the line joining the medial and lateral border of the scapula, and it is right angle to the receptor. Now, coming on to management. The foundation of management is therapeutic exercises. Then we also prescribe NSAIDs, and you can have multiple choices of doing it, but you should always be careful with people who have chronic kidney disease and with coronary artery disease, because most of the patients that you see are mostly 60 years and above. Most of them will have coronary artery disease. So most of the NSAIDs are contraindicated, except one, naproxen. So naproxen is safer in cardiac patients. So just remember those pharmacology lessons, and then we'll talk about the cortisone injection. PRP, the injection remains the same. So instead of cortisone, you inject PRP. We'll not talk about PRP today. Then different physical agents can be used, heat therapies. You can use ultrasound, IFTs, shortwave diathermy, hot packs, whatever. And manual therapy, people do manual therapy. I have no first-hand knowledge of how to manipulate. And then kinesiotaping also we'll talk about. So I will change my screen now. So rehabilitative exercise, I'll show you. Dr. Sahu had actually told me to share some of it. So can you see the lady with doing exercises? Can you see that?
No,
Dr.
sir.
Sahu?
No, sir. It's just the screen, the slide showing rehabilitation exercise phase 1.
Okay, all right. Okay, then I will again go to my Zoom and share, change the share. Okay. So I will stop share and then I will share again. Okay, now can you see?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Yes,
So
sir.
this is what we call as Codman exercises or the pendulum exercises.
Yes.
And this is one of the exercises that we actually teach in early phase because there is pain, there is restriction of shoulder. So we cannot really do a lot of sternus activity or sternus exercises. So the one of the exercises that we use in our phase 1 rehabilitation is the Codman's pendulum exercises. So this is our pendulum exercise. The next thing that we can do is what we call as anterior stretching. So now if you see here, you put your arm on the wall and then you try to stretch out the anterior portion of your shoulder. So when you are doing that, you are stretching the coracoacromial ligament as well as the pectorals. Okay. So I'll let it roll for one more time so that you can actually clearly see a view, because there are just subtle movements of rotating. Okay. This is again exercise to be done in phase 1. Then again, these are wand exercises, or we call as stick exercises. And here we are doing the extension exercises. You can use a stick, simple to do. Again, in phase 1 view. Phase 1, sorry, not view, the phase 1 rehabilitative exercises. Now, this is what we call as cross body adduction, okay, or horizontal adduction. So we want to stretch the posterior as well as the inferior capsule, and this is what you should instruct them to do. And I strongly feel that we should know the therapeutic exercises by yourself, and should not refer it for these simple things. Then again, this is phase 1 rehabilitative exercises. This is internal rotation with the help of a wand. We are deliberately not doing any kind of abduction or the anterior flexion in early phase, because this is something that induces pain. So you cannot do that in first phase when the pain is high. Once your pain settles, then and only then we move to the second phase. And I'll tell you when we move to the second phase of exercises. Again, this is a phase 1 exercise. This is an isometric exercises for internal rotator. Okay. So what she's trying to do is she's trying to push the wall inside. Okay. So this is an isometric exercise for internal rotator. Now, when I say phase 2, so when your pain has become better, then we do the isotonic exercise with TheraBand. So what we are doing is a strengthening of the internal rotators. All right. Okay. So now this is isometric exercises for external rotators. So we are keeping the hand and then rotating it outwards, trying to push the wall outwards. So this is an isometric exercises for the external rotators of shoulder. I do both isometric as well as isotonic exercises in the phase 2, whereas in phase 1, I limit myself to prescribing isometric exercises. Now, this is again a phase 2 exercises. We are doing strengthening of external rotators of shoulder, which you can do easily with a TheraBand. TheraBand, I hope everybody knows there are different colors, and the color indicate the resistance of the TheraBand. Now, as I said, the scapular disc kinesis, one of the most important muscle, not only for disc kinesis, but also for stabilization of scapula, is this exercise. This is basically focused for strengthening of the middle and upper trapezius. Okay. So this is again in phase 2. And also when you require to have stabilization of scapula, you have to teach this exercise to strengthen the middle trapezius as well as the upper trapezius. Then these incline push-ups. These are again for the trapezius muscle, the middle trapezius muscle, and also for stabilization of scapula. This is for serratus anterior. Okay. TheraBand exercises for serratus anterior. Again, as I showed you the slide during the scapular disc kinesis, the serratus anterior gets attached to the underside of the under of the scapula, and it is a very important exercise to stabilize the scapula. Okay. So I'll stop sharing and I'll come back to my presentation. Okay, so this we talked about the rehabilitative exercises. They're very important and people will really have to do. And you will find, particularly in stage 1, you give them some pain medication, do some heat therapy, and do these exercises, and they become all right within a couple of weeks. So wonderful, wonderful effect. Now coming on to kinesio taping, there is no rocket science. I'll teach you. This is what we call as K1 taping, and this is the basic taping that we do first. And we go from the neck to the shoulder area, which represents the upper edge of the trapezius muscle. Trapezius muscle are usually painful in all of these patients. Sometimes they are tense and sometimes they are even weak. So we tape this part of the muscle, and then we also put another tape around the medial border of the scapula. And we have put both just to show you, but you can put only unilaterally or the affected part. Then coming on to rotator cuff, the rotator cuff taping. So the first tape you should attach just beyond the vertebra, and then your patient actually turns the head away from the affected shoulder, and you take this tape and then you stretch it out outwards. You don't have to go above the acromion, but over the acromion, under and above the the under, not covering above the acromion. You have to go under, but over the acromion, and then attach it. The second tape you have to apply from lower corner of the shoulder blade, and this goes diagonally upwards towards the shoulder like this. So these are basically, it is a combination of two kinds of taping. One was trapezius taping, and this is a rotator cuff taping. So this you can use, and it usually works for around 7 days, and then you have to do taping again. Now coming on to minimally invasive interventions, or what we call as USG guided corticosteroid injections. I'm going to talk about USG guided because I have not injected a landmark based injection in last maybe 9 years now. So I forgot all the landmarks. So most of the injections that I do nowadays is US chicken. So the first injection is glenohumeral joint injection. Everything remains the same, but the technique changes because we are going to use the ultrasound probe. Usually we use a linear probe, which is a high frequency probe, and the frequency goes from 7 to 15 megahertz. And here, this is the probe. This is what I'm showing you is the posterior aspect. Okay. And so this is our probe, deltoid infraspinatus. This is our humeral head. This is glenoid. And this is the space which is our target. So we come from here and then go and inject here. And this is how we place our probe. And what we see on the screen is, this is our deltoid. And so basically we have to look for infraspinatus. And once we follow our infraspinatus, we continue to follow it outwards, and we see humeral head, go a little bit downwards, and we can see glenoid labrum. So here I'll show you, this is our humerus head, and this is our tip of the glenoid labrum, and this is a small window where the needle is here. This needle is actually not going into it. So they will have to reposition it, and needle should come here. Once your needle comes here, once you are into that space, this area will not rise as you push it inside. Okay. But if your infraspinatus is expanding, that means your needle is outside. The other injection that is commonly used is, so there are different injections, and we actually have to do a tailor-made solution. So if you have a problem with ACJ joint, then and only then you will inject in an ACJ joint. Okay. So this is our acromioclavicular joint. Acromioclavicular joint is superficial, but it's tricky. Tricky in the way, because if you inject it from the superior portion, the ligaments are really thick. It's really hard to enter. I really find it very difficult to enter, and try to enter from the anterior aspect of the acromioclavicular joint. But again, these are my things, and you try to do whatever works best for you. So here we can put our probe. This is a flat probe, or that what you are talking about, linear probe. Okay, high frequency probe, and you can do inline injection. So this is inline injection. Okay, this is our acromioclavicular joint, and the needle goes from outside to inside, and goes in the acromioclavicular joint. Or you can turn the linear probe in 90 degrees, and your joint is, as I said, the anterior part is easy to enter. The needle finds lesser resistance. So you go from there and then you inject. The third commonly done injection is a subacromial injection. The subacromial is subacromial subdeltoid bursa. And this is what you see if I put my probe in a simple sitting position. And the other thing is what we called as Cras position, or we also called as modified Cras position. So modified Cras position is when you try to put your affected arm on your hips. Or sometimes what I tell to my patient is, put your hand in your back pocket. So when I do that, they become modified Cras. So as soon as I do modified Cras position, my supraspinatus tendon becomes straighter. Okay, so it is easier for me to look the supraspinatus in a long axis. When I say long axis, then I am looking at the tendon through the longitudinal view of the supraspinatus or whatever. And if I say short axis, that means I'm looking at the cross section of that particular tendon. So this is basically for the long axis view of the supraspinatus tendon. Again, we put our probe, and here we can see this is our deltoid, this is our bursa, and this what we call as parrot beak. This is called as parrot's beak. So parrot's beak is the supraspinatus tendon. Somewhere here inside is the infraspinatus, and our target is this space. Okay, And again, there is the articular cartilage. The black thing above the humerus is the articular cartilage. And here, this is our needle path. So we go from outside to inside, and this is an inline injection. So you can see your needle passing through wholly towards this target space. If your needle touches the supraspinatus tendon, your patient is going to cry. So that tells you that you are going beyond that bursa. Then we can do rotator cuff injection. Rotator cuff injection, that's an anterior injection. Sometimes we can do, usually what happens that if you have, say, fluid into subacromial bursa, and most of the times you will have a paratendinous biceps paratendinous fluid also, because the paratendinous fluid in biceps is in contact with the intraarticular shoulder. So there will always be there. So sometimes people do, even I do sometimes, a single shot double injection where you go from anteriorly and you come from here and you enter here. So you inject bursa, and if you want to inject the paratendinous portion of the biceps, then we, with the same kind of trajectory, you move forward. Then what you see, something around it. So basically, when you see here, what you see here is a halo. It is not very clear, but this is the biceps tendon, and what you see around is a halo here. So this halo is the paratendinous portion of biceps, and around that is the coracohumeral ligament. So you go in this space between the biceps and coracohumeral ligament for the paratendinous biceps injection. And here you can do an injection for the rotator cuff. Now, coming on to the end of my presentation. So there are various studies which have been done, and some of the common or interesting study that I find is this study. This was done in 2013, where there is a systemic review of randomized controlled trials comparing surgical interventions versus the conservative therapy, which yielded moderate evidence that surgical intervention was not more than impingement directed exercises. And then there is another interesting study which shows that this is a 2018 article, systemic review, which found that there was no additional benefit in pain reduction when comparing the result with the decompression surgery for acromion to placebo surgery at the end of 12 months. Now, this is a very interesting surgery, which is similar to, if you remember, there was a long time ago, there was a surgery which what you called as arthroscopic lavage for knee joint. And at some point of time, it was a great fashion to do arthroscopic lavage for osteoarthritis knee. And this wonderful study was done in Philadelphia, where they did a sham arthroscopic lavage with actual arthroscopic lavage. They compared it, and they found out that people with sham treatment were having the same kind of wonderful results. So it's a wonderful study similar to that. That sham treatment gives you almost the same kind of benefit as the surgery itself. Thank you.